Hi, welcome back to Summit Live. I'm Mark Becker, the sales director at Summit International Flooring, and with me today is Alan Smith, our market development manager.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back.
We have a really great show lined up today. We've got a guest who's very interesting, someone who came out of corporate America, is now doing podcasts and speaking events, who brings a lot of knowledge and a deep-rooted place in the community. With that, we're going to bring on David Kepron.
Hello, gentlemen.
Hello,
Hi.
David.
David,
welcome.
Thank you for joining us today.
No problem. I would like to just get a cut, if you could, of that opening music, because I've been sitting there going, "Oh, God, this is so cool."
Isn't that groovy?
I'm just grooving out, and it's a great way to calm your guests down, you know. So I kind of feel like I should be in a spa somewhere. So
thank you very much.
Well, we always talk about, we don't want this show to be very intense. We don't want question answers. We like just having conversations with people within the A&D community. And like we were saying once before, we built this studio for the reason of just keeping in touch with people and keeping us all together. And over the last year, it's been an important part of what we do. And we're very appreciative of your time. If people don't know who you are, I'll start out by saying this. I met David at a small scale trade show that was very intense, where people could have real conversations. We met briefly. We really don't know much about each other. We're going to learn about each other today while the viewing audience learns as well. I know that you came from corporate America, like we said in the intro, and went out on your own, which we're going to talk about. We also know that you're an artist, which was something I hadn't known before.
Amazing artist.
Yeah. Your work is, like Alan said, really amazing work.
Look at that. Amanda Gorman. How's that? Oh, look. Hey, you guys. I'm all blushing over here now. But keep going. Oh, no. Okay. It's fine.
Well, you do have a lot of talent for sure. You see those instruments? The only thing I could play is the radio.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think it's best if we let you take over and tell us about yourself. How I mentioned your background's deep rooted. Why don't you let the audience know who you are and where you're coming from, and then we'll talk about what you're doing today.
Yeah, you know, it's really interesting, that intro about came from corporate America, which is kind of an interesting, and it's not inaccurate, because I was vice president of global design strategies at Marriott as the last phase of the career just prior to the pandemic. But, you know, I've been 30 years in the architecture and design world. So 10 years in traditional architecture, born and raised in Montreal, went to school at McGill University there, and started practicing architecture. But I was always teaching, you know, along the way, and really interested in academia and teaching and making sure that I was staying involved in development of young minds. And then I hit 30 years of retail design. 20 years of retail design, and working for literally, you know, big name international brands or mom and pop shops and everyone sort of in between. And then I had the good fortune to end up at Marriott for about 4.5 years, and stepped away from that role just prior to the pandemic. It has been an interesting year or 20 months, almost 2 years now. When I think about it, this is kind of amazing. The kind of growth that we've all had to sort of take on in the past year and a half or so. So just, you know, as a note, and on the corporate side, it is interesting when you say that, because I've always, you know, had a fascination to being connected to the larger stream of a conversation. And the corporate world it's so funny you just say that, because I still find it to be slightly a misnomer for me, because I don't know that I actually fit particularly well in a corporate world. Although I do say I'm very entrepreneurial, and that I suppose we're going to get to in a moment, which would include those paintings, by the way, and some other things. And I've always had that entrepreneurial spirit, you know, to take me beyond simply the job I was doing, to look into other things that I could do, or things that I was fascinated in. I think that's always been a push, you know, what I really am fascinated in, what I want to learn, you know, and that has moved me from career to career, from traditional architecture to retail to hospitality, and now into a world, I think, that combines all of those things together, which is a lot of fun.
Well, you mentioned teaching. Were you planning on going into teaching in the beginning?
You know, teaching is fun. I don't know that I was planning to ever go into teaching per se, but I literally started teaching. My first job was a camp counselor, you know, and I was teaching land sports, you know, teaching people how to run hurdles and throw, you know, things and play sports and things like that. Because I was always, you know, very interested in sports throughout my life, and been a competitive triathlete. But my teaching thing really began by teaching skiing. I was on skis at the age of 2. You did that, when you grew up in Montreal. If you weren't a hockey player, you had to find something else to be able to survive the Montreal winters. And so skiing was it. And my mom and dad took me and my 4 brothers, put us in a car with a dog, and went skiing every weekend. But then that led to teaching, and then led to really becoming a ski school technical director, and then teaching other people how to teach. And that led to teaching in universities and design schools, which is always interesting. I love telling this story because it's so important, I think, in terms of one's trajectory, talking about how you got there, wherever there is,
Mm-hmm.
And I have mostly gotten there by way of serendipity and just saying yes to those moments that pop up on your path and give you that opportunity to do something new and exciting and different. And that really was part of the way I got to the world of retail. I was at lunch one day with a friend. I was running an interior design program at a college in Montreal. And she said, "Oh, they want me to go to Singapore to run this program called visual merchandising. I don't want to go." She says, "My sons are going to be in college and I just want to stay here." And I said, I'm not doing much. I can be in Singapore. Literally 2 weeks later, I am in Singapore running an international school in a program called visual merchandising. And I didn't know what the heck that was. I had designed a couple of things for malls in Montreal, but never really been connected to retail. But the teaching thing got me to Singapore, where I taught. And then from there, I branched out and was doing educational programs for retail organizations in Bangkok and the Philippines and those areas in Southeast Asia. And that brought me back to New York because I loved the world of retail, which was amazing. It was advertising and consumer behavior and trend analysis and fashion and theater and lighting and industrial design and all these things combined into one world. I thought, oh, this is magical. And it really was. I think anyone who's been in the retail world will tell you that once it's in you, it's really hard to get it out of you.
Well, you never have the same day twice, I'm sure.
That is true. And, when you're merchandising baby booties, bras and canoes and enormous TVs in the same day, you learn how to deal with adversity, because all those things just take a different mindset. But I learned early, to work in the retail space because I grew up, so to speak, or cut my teeth in a small design office in New York that were visual merchandisers. I was a resident architect. They were the merchandisers, and I learned to think like a merchant and walk a sales floor and know what seemed to be out of place and talk about assortment planning and all those, things, sales per square foot.
That's kind of interesting that you didn't wind up at a federated type of job.
Yeah.
You didn't wind up helping a Bed Bath & Beyond type place grow 600 new stores. How do you go from what you're talking about into hospitality?
Yeah.
As opposed to retail?
Well, so let's remember I said lunch that led me to Singapore. So now I'm going to say speaking engagement leads me to Marriott. And so I wrote a book and was published in the end of 2014 called Retail Revolution, Why Creating, thank you. Wow, you guys are so good at this. Retail Revolution, Why Creating Right Brain Stores Will Shape the Future of Shopping in a Digitally Driven World. And so it really deals with 3 big subject areas: branding and what makes great brand experiences. So I dig into storytelling and play and ritual and all those things that are driving the underpinnings to why we engage in brands or those kinds of experiences. The whole middle section was neuroscience. I was studying psychology before architecture, and I'm a bit of a neuroscience geek. And I started to really dig into the brain and what was underpinning the decisions that we make when we're in stores and how that could be leveraged. If you only knew a little bit about how your brain works, you might not do some of the things you think matter to guests when they don't. But what was driving and what was motivating people at a neurobiological basis, which was more than psychology, by the way. So neurobiology suggests that we all act a certain way based on brain function. Psychology is yes, and sort of the family of origin stories or experiences that you have that sort of craft certain reactions to things that are not necessarily instinctual. And then the last part was technology. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt. I was going to say it's a crazy small world. I started as a psych major in college, and here we are talking today.
Yeah, and
Alan and I were speaking before we brought you on today about exactly what you're talking about, the neuroscience and how you apply that to design. And what I was saying to Alan earlier was, I would think that many designers design a space saying, okay, this is a place where people are going to congregate. This is a area where you're transversing from building A to building B, and they're thinking about the use of the space.
Yeah.
And you're kind of taking a different approach. You're making space based on the why and how people think, as opposed to trying to get them to think something through the design. You're designing for how they think. You've kind of turned the question around.
Yeah, that's interesting. Let me hit that in 1 second, just tie this book thing down. How do I get to Marriott? And that is, I give a speech effectively. And I see these two guys from Marriott get up and give a speech on what they were doing with this new brand called Moxie and how they were leveraging technology and looking at this new guest. I'm fascinated with this, new cohort of shoppers. And I turned to the woman beside me and said, well, that was enough to make you want to move to Bethesda, wasn't it? And literally 6 months later, I was stepping out of the retail design world and into this new world of hospitality, which I didn't actually know very much about. Like, I didn't know very much about retail, but I knew about design, and I knew about what motivates people and what drives interactions and engagement. So to that, and using that as a segue into the answer to your question, I have always been ultimately interested in what people feel in places and how you can leverage those potential feelings to enhance engagement or to undermine engagement. And so what I discovered after studying psychology and being really interested in sort of the interpersonal neurobiology, the dynamics between people, about looking for something that was more fundamental than simply that I was happy or sad or liked or disliked or whatever, but what was really driving those things, and began to look at brain functional areas, and specifically at things like empathy. What is it that drives empathy and empathic connections, and how do you use the understanding of brain processes to help support getting people into deeper and more long-lasting relationships? And so neuroscience has happened to it's been fascinating, because when you begin to look at many of the decisions that we do make in the shopping aisle, it's got nothing to do with anything but how your brain processes the information, what you're instinctually primed to believe, what your natural predictive biases are going to suggest, and then what happens in situ in the moment that actually triggers, one of those paths or the other. But mostly the path is instinctual. And your brain is working way faster than your cognitive, ability to say, I'm going to choose this over that. Your brain's often made up its mind prior, and you're sort of lagging a few milliseconds behind.
Well, David, I think you're the right person to ask, because I've always been kind of curious about this. So I came from a hospitality background before I came into sales. And I was always wondering, from a design standpoint, yes, you're designing for the guests, right? But is there a psychological element to designing for the interaction between the service and the guests, so the people that work in that space? And does design affect how they perform or interact?
Wow, what a great question. I would say that, because you mentioned, embedded in that is, what is the interpersonal, what's that interaction about? Mm-hmm. Design of that environment supports the opportunity for those interactions to come about, right? And so what I do know is there's this set of neurons in your brain called mirror neurons, discovered by Giacomo Rizzolatti in Parma, Italy. And he had this really interesting experiment where they discovered that in higher order primates, the action of the researcher putting his sandwich down on the table triggered the same set of neurons in this monkey's brain as if the monkey was reaching for a peanut on the table himself. The monkey didn't do anything. He just watched this interaction happen. And they began to discover, wow, these primates have this ability to see something happening and have their brain activity react in the same way as if they were doing it. And we have the same structures. So these are the neural sets that are responsible for things like when you see and watch certain behaviors, how you feel anxious or sad or happy, because we share in that affect, the way we act and interact. And a lot of it's picked up by facial interaction and things like that. And those mirror neurons are really fascinating, because they are the reason why, if you don't walk into Walmart or whatever your local place is that has the requisite greeter, and they don't smile at you, how it likely predetermines the next part of your pathway or your experience path. in terms of how you feel, not where you walk, but how you might feel because of the missed opportunity for interaction that's really simple. So we've all had those experiences, right? We've all been in the boardroom when the guy walks in, he's had a bad morning and kicked the dog, and then his coffee spilled on his lap as he was driving to work. And you can tell, you can tell what he's feeling. You don't have to have seen those interactions, but you know it because you can feel it. And we've all been around people who we say, oh God, that guy's bad energy, man. Because we have this weird ability to see and interact and feel those interactions in the same way that I can rely on the fact that my texts are all in my phone, but I can't see them floating around in the air. But there is very clearly that interaction between us that set up opportunities, and then design acts to support those interactions.
I think a real basic example might be if you're at the restaurant and where the food servers come out with your food, if they put the wrong type of flooring in and it's slippery, and they keep worrying about as they come out and somebody falls or a plate drops, the guests are going to have a totally different experience as if they had smooth service.
Sure. Yeah.
So I guess
it's really
that's a small example of it.
That's a great example, because what's interesting is about this particular these neurons that have this ability to do this. Whereas the monkey understands a goal-oriented kind of action. Move your hand, pick up the sandwich, move your hand, put the peanut in your mouth, whatever. Humans have the ability to take it to the next level, which is we can infer intent through certain actions. And so we infer a lot of things. We make up, in the absence of knowledge, we're really good at doing this, making up narratives in our mind about what the next possible thing is you're going to do. And that's based on experience for sure. But you're right. If that server comes out of the kitchen and he's really hesitant about walking across the floor, you might just perceive in his facial expression or his body language a sense of hesitancy or a bit of worry or concern, and that could possibly throw you off and say, what is it about this waiter that's not so great? And that might affect the kind of tip you end up giving him in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. But I can say from experience that the narratives I play out in my head don't always come true.
That is true too. Well, those are called thinking traps, and one of one of these areas now that I'm fascinated in is trying to understand how to navigate this uncertainty in this area of unknown that we have now, and part of the idea of building resilience is understanding how you think through certain circumstances. And if you're full of all kinds of thinking traps, and there are a lot, there's probably 8 or 12 different ways that we think about things, has a direct effect on how we end up behaving in relation to certain experiences. So
you've gone past the psychology of it, that fast food uses a lot of red and yellow in their signage because that makes people feel more hungry, the studies have shown. You've gone past that, not just into how people feel, but how they think. We work with Object Carpet. Object Carpet came out with a new collection, and the design names are Walk and Talk, Deal and Feel, things like that, Skill and Chill,
Move and Groove.
They tried to make names that make people think they should be doing certain things when they're walking on that type of flooring. So it's interesting that there is science behind design, not just, oh, that's a pretty color, or we need more sound dampening.
Oh, wow. I mean, so what's great about what you just said is, yes, and this was like the eureka moment for me, right? Is that as an architect trained and educated to work in the world of design, there were things that I understood intuitively, right, about color relationships, about how far is too far to walk to do X or Y, or what ergonomics are like, or what colors and materials drive certain emotions. But what became always a challenge in our world was, well, how do you know? And you're often sort of in a space, well, I've got like 20 years of experience. I'm sort of guessing that based on, repetitive successes or a few failures, what works and what doesn't work. But now one of these eureka moments for me in the writing of the book was that, no, there's a lot of science that will substantiate exactly what's going to happen. So it's not just my opinion. I can go to the science, and there's more now because we've learned more about the brain in the past, 10, 15 years than we have in the past century, because of a lot of technologies that have evolved to allow us to actually peer literally into the brain and functional areas and learn more. And so that is now coming to bear in evidence-based design practices, where I'm working on a hotel project now where they want to bring science to bear on the creation of a super well room, a room that really enhances a sense of well-being. And we know through things like biophilia and through different kinds of design and things that you can build into projects, aside from the materials that have to be sustainably sourced and all that, that you can support these design decisions with great science.
Well, it's a fascinating topic. I didn't want to cut you off, Alan. I just wanted to make a note that if anybody wants to learn more about this, David's company, NXTLVL, Next Level Design Experience, in his book, you'll hear about the why of things. And this is kind of what we're talking about, and what David's explaining is why people will think certain things and how you can use that in the field of design.
Yeah, and since we're on that, I would like to mention your podcast as well, that people should go check that out.
Great. Yes, you should. along with this, if anything happened in this past year and a half, like most people, we were all of a sudden sequestered in our homes. We couldn't go anywhere. And I left the big corporate gig to pursue another opportunity. Well, the pandemic shut that down. And then all of a sudden I'm thinking, okay, how do I maintain this fascination with teaching or speaking? I had like 18 speaking gigs, and it was going to be a great year of travel. All that evaporated, but I knew I was very interested in having a dialogue continue. And besides that, the fact that I knew that I'm driven by these interactions, so I needed to keep on speaking to people. And it became just a really great way to begin to dig at opportunities with people and have these dialogues that crossed the sort of multidisciplinary fascinations that I have, including, I use an acronym called DATA or data. You say tomato, I say tomato, whatever. And mine is design, architecture, technology, and the arts. And within those 4 categories, we've had James Beard award-winning chefs to cognitive neuroscientists to hotel CEOs and designers and poets and all kinds of things, which has been really interesting.
Well, I think the whole thing is interesting, and people should know that you do speaking engagements. Obviously, if they want to have you at one of their events, they should reach out to you directly. Yeah. And like Alan said, they should listen to the podcast because it's interesting stuff. We're not just here throwing product at people, but we're here sharing information that can help all of us in our successes.
Yeah, and that's what I appreciate about your podcast. You're doing a similar thing, a different approach to us, because we're just curious too. We want to know what designers are thinking, what's going on out there. And a topic, what's kind of funny is a little bit of like a duality. So because of the pandemic, I feel like a lot of conversation has gone towards sustainable products, healthy products, but at the same time, there's really a push for integrating, high tech into design as well. So, is there a psychological component to that? Are we bringing both into this space for the same reason, or are they for different reasons?
Wow, you guys, this is okay. These are great questions, and I'm just sorry that we don't have 2 hours to dig into this. But I'm not sure there's necessarily a psychological aspect to this. But I am fascinated with. Well, I mean, there's always psychology or neuroscience embedded in there somewhere because that's just part of who we are. But I think that there is a deep transition or shift being made within a culture of new consumers who are experience seekers in a very different way. And one of the largest challenges for organizations, companies, brands, corporations, et cetera, to try to understand is as that shift and disengagement from, I think, a world of relying on tradition, the potential knowns, and going back and having a sense of comfort about what used to be, continues to shift further and further away because we're moving exponentially at a rate of change that is fast and faster and faster and faster. The past fades into the distance also exponentially quickly. And I think there's a new group of consumers, experience seekers, who are simply looking for different things and for whom long-held traditions may simply not apply anymore.
I also think there's 2 things going on. There's the why of how people think and how design works with that. And then there's the technology. I think we're looking at a demographic of the future consumers, the people in their low 20s today, have grown up with joysticks and electronics in their hands, and they like that type of interaction, and they're not afraid of technology.
Yeah,
right. So they feel comfortable to walk in and go to a kiosk instead of actually talking to a real person.
Right. So
we're blending all these things into the new spaces.
Yeah. What's fun about this when you begin to look at it, and this is where I love this study of anthropology or sociology or social anthropology, is it's that, and not just that they're easy. I mean, they just have a facility with using this device in their hand, but when you watch and begin to understand what they're doing, what they're doing is they're storytelling. They're making up narratives that are relevant to them because they created them. And that in some way is also shaping the direction of their experience trajectory through every day. And what's interesting about technology is that experience is fluid and moving very quickly. They don't land or stay very long in one place, but that they are story makers is a huge opportunity to leverage if you can understand how to allow them to integrate themselves into the narrative of a brand experience. To what degree can you use this device in what I call technempathy, which is beyond technology? It's talking about technology in the service of empathic connection, how you use technology to make and cement and make longer, more profound that idea of connection and relationship through technology. And that's huge.
Well, that was my last question, was going to be to you about what's next. And you're reading my mind by giving it to us. What are we even doing here?
Yeah.
We could have just turned on the camera.
Just let David go.
Yeah. Well, but it's fascinating, right? Because when you begin to
Yeah.
see the use of these technologies as a way to narrate and substantiate one's existence, right? Which is we're always trying to find meaning. And part of that meaning is what narrative we create about ourselves and what narrative we create about the world around us and how we interact. But for many, many years, brands sort of created these narratives and these stories and customer journey paths in a corporate office somewhere, and the guest really didn't influence that anyway. But now, because this young group wants to do that, and that's where they find the sense of agency and empowerment, is the making of stories. There's a huge opportunity to leverage that and engage them in a very different way.
Well,
and immersive digital tech, oh my God, yeah. And immersive digital technologies is huge, and its ability to be able to create very different environments that can react in more real-time scenarios than
rather than tell us how to think, they're going to let us think the way we think and make our experience more, I guess, enriched.
Yeah, I think that was always theoretical, that there was a relationship between the brand and the consumer. I think it's actually real now. There's that real-time give and take and communication, whether it's on social media or interactive apps within a space. I mean, it's amazing.
It is.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we could speak about this for 2 or 3 hours, I'm sure. We like to keep our shows relatively short, keep it lively, give people information. But we'll say again, people should look at your website. Melissa, you could flop that up on the screen again for a moment.
Thank you.
People should take a look at what David's doing. Go to NXTLVL. You can listen to the podcasts. David's got interesting things to say, and I think we can all learn from it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah.
Right, next level. That's the acronym, right? Next level. Let's just take it to the next level and keep on pushing for something different.
Something different and fresh always. So before we close out today's show, we want to let everybody know that if you have interest or need for samples from Summit, you can reach us at info@summit-flooring.com. You can call us at 877-496-3566. Alan, I, and the rest of our sales force are ready to help you out.
Yeah, and if you're watching this video, the podcast is also available alongside Next Level on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast.
Okay.
Thank you, guys. It's been great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, David.
We really appreciate your time.
You're welcome.